Well, welcome to Fridays at Noon. My name is Ken Pennock. I'm the Director of People Development at the University of Denver in the Human Resources and Inclusive Community Division. And this is a really special Fridays at Noon. In fact, we're calling it our farewell Fridays at Noon. This will be the last session that we do in this format. And then we also have a another way that this becomes special is we're going to be talking with my friend and colleague, Greg Giesen, who is our manager of people development, and really exciting about his latest book. It's all about me, stories and insights from the Geese. And I have to point out, though, that this is not his first book. This is his second book, and in fact, he previously wrote Mondays at 3, a story for managers, stories and insights from the Geese. Edit. The first was Mondays at 3, an award-winning book, a story for managers learning to lead, which was an award winner. And so you went ahead and you moved in to take on another book. So congratulations on this publication.
Yeah, well, I just like listening to you talk about me.
Well, you know, we often do that.
Because it's all about me.
We often do that. So, and I do want to share that people who are here today, and thank you very much for coming, we do have a surprise for you at the end of the session. So thank you for coming and spending some of your time with us today. Well, let's dive in. I have to ask about your nickname, Geese. What is the story behind that?
You know, I wish I actually had a good story. If it was, it'd probably be in here. You know, it's just short for my last name. And it was a childhood nickname. I just embraced it over the years. What's interesting, though, is I have 5 siblings. We all went to the same grade school. I'm the only one that got the Geese nickname, which seems kind of odd to me. So I got that going for me.
Well, must be a story there as well. So that's the mystery.
Yeah,
of where it came
but
from.
I'll take it. I kind of like it.
Well, I've been reading through your book, and in fact, I've marked up a number of pages, and I wrote in the book, and this is actually a compliment. I use books as a kind of a living resource, taking it forward. And you know, my initial thoughts about this was that the learning lessons were really subtle. It wasn't kind of in your face, here's what to do, how to do it, but the learning from it really evolved from your experiences. And it's not so much as a how to or what to do, but really more of a from what you took. And if I may share just a brief quote from a story that I really appreciated. The background of this particular story was that Greg was leading a week-long leadership program in Colorado, outdoor leadership program. And throughout the week, there were a number of different exercises, programs, as many of you in the audience have experienced in learning programs with Greg. And one was for the group to select their leading participant, their optimal participant, who really took leadership from the learning, and they would all elect who they wanted that to be. And just a few lines of outcome of that was, quote, he led through, this is the individual who won, Stuart, so to speak, won. He led through his individual connections. He led through his unending support of all of our efforts. He led by bringing everyone together for a common cause. And he did this simply by being himself. And often we have a vision of what a leader is, being out in front. But leadership presents itself in so many ways. And this particular story was a great example of how kind of the from what the learnings come. I have to also share that a number of these were rather moving. And I even know of some of them, but I didn't know about all of them. These get actually quite personal.
Yeah.
What made you want to write a book that's really revealing about you?
You know, part of it is that's just who I am. You know, that's how I prefer to interact with people. And then I kind of translated that into my writing style. So it's, you know, I'm doing what I'm most comfortable with. but the other thing, and I don't know if everybody would know this, but when I was thinking about writing this a year ago, it was going to be more of a legacy book. I thought, I don't have any kids. I'm divorced. I wanted, I was in that state of mind where I wanted to leave something behind. And I didn't know how I would do it. And then I thought, why don't I write a book and put my favorite stories in there? And so originally, that's kind of what the purpose was. And so I particularly wanted to write it in a way where people who read it really got a sense of who I am or who I was.
Okay. Well, that kind of leads me into the title. The title is It's All About Me, which is not something you might expect from a leadership or just a personal story book. Where did that come from?
Part of it was probably to mess with people. and I say that because most people that know me know that I'm not a it's all about me kind of guy. And so it's ironic. It's an ironic title intentionally. The title, it would suggest that it is all about me, and it is, but the intent of the book and the way I wrote it was so that people would see themselves in the stories and start reflecting on their life through my story. And so in actuality, and here's the ironic part, is it's really not about me. It's really about you, the reader. And that was kind of the transition in how I wrote it so that it would kind of end up that way. What's funny about the title, though, is people were trying to find my book on Amazon, and instead of typing my name in, they typed, "It's all about you." And so what comes up is a book on narcissism.
That's the second part of our...
Yeah, and I think that's perfect, but I can't find your book.
Well, actually, the All About Me, that struck me a few ways. One, knowing you and working with you, as many have, is that's a real passion about you for people to be authentic, to know themselves and be themselves. And actually, in a number of the stories, you really share and present about them, really. And you were part of their story that you took from it. And so do you have a process for writing a book? I mean, do you do the 1 hour a day, the 1 full day a week, lots of coffee and such?
Yes. I'll tell you the best part of writing a book, if you come down to it, and any author that doesn't admit this is lying, it's when you actually get the first copy in the mail. Because this is what you visualize the whole time. And what I visualized, something like this, and then they give you an author's copy where you get one final shot to make an edit or two. Of course, everything costs money, but before it actually goes in. So that's by far the best part of the book. The other part is, being able to put a story into words and then share it with other people, which is if you think about it, it's kind of a vulnerable process because they're reading about you and you're writing. Right. So my process a lot of times is if I get stuck writing, I go to Starbucks. For this first book, I was in Starbucks for almost every chapter because I get caught up in my own head, start over critiquing what I'm writing, and then that's some people call it writer's block. So then I put it all in the backpack. I go to Starbucks, get a big coffee, get a table, and with all the commotion, it makes it easier for me to kind of separate myself from my own story, and then all of a sudden the words just start popping out. And it worked for both books. So that's kind of the process.
So you had a process, your process, and also what I'm hearing is the tangibility. We're so used to the online and the, reading via our phones, but to have something real tangible where people hold on to, like I was writing it, turning the pages, marking it, and so to keep.
Yeah, right.
The flip side, then what would be the most difficult part, or what is the most difficult part?
You know, it's the writing itself. And it's hard to write and not critique what you just wrote, and then write again and critique, you know, especially for me, you know, I have to get rid of that critic in my head and get into a flow. And what I discovered early on was that it's easier to write a story than to write like an article or a book that's just factual, because you know, you don't feel a lot with that. But with the story, especially something you've experienced or that I've experienced, all of a sudden it just kind of gets fun to write. And then more and more comes out. And that's what I would call the flow. And it's just a matter of trying to find what that looks like and to really get rid of the inner critic at that point of the process. Otherwise, you know, I'd never get anything accomplished.
You know, that's similar. You do a lot of work with public speaking and Toastmasters here at DU. And that's what, you know, when we talk about public speaking, you know, the memorizing is often don't memorize because you want to flow with what the message you want to share, or you begin critiquing every single thing. So it's a similar, for you, it sounds like a real similar aspect.
And I'll tell you the other part that, you know, if anybody ever wants to write something, you need to be prepared for, which is the first time you get your rough copy back from the editor. I mean, you know, I worked with Barbara Brooks, who some people know here. Flamingo Strategies is her company, and she preferred to edit the manuscript versus electronic. You know, and so when she brought it back to me, I've never seen so much red in my life. Like, it brought me back to 5th grade, and I felt like a failure. I'm like,
dreaded red
should
pen.
I quit now? You know,
Yeah, right.
And she's like, no. She had to talk me off the ledge, you know, because all the red marks. And so, you know, you're very sensitive. I'm very sensitive at first when you write something, someone else is looking at it. So, you know, you just I develop a comfort zone after a while with those kind of things.
But even writing this experience, writing the book, you're actually continuing your story about what built this book.
Yeah.
In terms of putting yourself out.
It's almost a story in itself about writing a book.
So the stories I mentioned briefly, I quoted a little bit from one about, I think it was called the Getting Schooled by Students, I believe was roughly the title. And often when we're, you know, when you're presenting or speaking or leading, we learn more from who we're leading than they may even at times get from us, which can be a tough, humbling pill to swallow. But as an example of that, all these stories really have insights or lessons that you learned and took from that. Why was that? What drove that? Why was that important?
Yeah. You know, my whole career, what I learned early on, probably through Toastmasters many, many years ago, was that using a story to teach is probably one of the most powerful ways to teach something. And I think it also lends immediate credibility if you can incorporate stories, because it shows wisdom, experience, and those things. So I love doing that. And I think that's why I started to remember a lot of stories, because I started utilizing that way. So I teach best through stories. So it was very natural to add that piece. But I also say is the lessons learned, and not every chapter has lessons learned, but the lessons are as powerful as the story itself. And in some cases, they wouldn't exist without the story, right? So I could not separate the two out. Yeah.
Well, I had to ask this. Was there a particular story that was notably difficult for you to write and to share?
Yeah, there was. In fact, it's the 3 stories that I kept procrastinating. You know, I knew I wanted to write them, and I couldn't do it. And so they ended up being the last 3 stories I wrote. Now, they're mixed in. They're not the last 3 stories in the book. But the first one was, this is going to be hard for all 3 of them probably, but was my parents passing. When it happened, they were 2 years apart from each other, and I won't get into the story, but I started just writing about my experience when my father first started to go, in that last 8 hours. And then 2 years later, my mother, almost like a repeat situation. And so I started writing again about what I was experiencing. And so the story about my parents is I just took both of those and combined them into it. That was one. Probably one maybe even harder than that was my dog Bailey, who not only was my best friend in life, but he was here all the time with me. Like our staff adopted him. So I took him everywhere I went. And the story's about when he got attacked by 2 large dogs and almost died. And as some of people here know what that was like for me, it was touch and go for about a week. So that was hard. And then, but he survived, and he made it through, so then, fast forward a year and a half later, I'm writing the Bailey story, and that's when he passes. So it's like a double whammy during that story. And then the last one, it's not so much a sad story, but this one is by far the last. My editor even said, I don't know if you want to include that story in your book, because it was a story about when I got fired, and it's humiliating. And I made mistakes, and it was, traumatic for me to be let go. Actually, I was asked to resign, is what it was. But you know what? I thought it was a significant story, especially how it happened. And I didn't want to hide anything. And I learned so much from it, and it's got a surprise ending. So I couldn't do it without it, but, writing about a failure is, is kind of difficult, and I'm putting it all out there and how it happened. And so, yeah, that was very tough.
With the Bailey story, that's something that, and some of us here from our unit, what was out of that experience, the whole division rallied around Bailey and you.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty amazing experience to see. Our unit, we're often disparate and everywhere, but Bailey and you kind of brought everyone in together around that. So
yeah, Bailey used to love, like I'd bring him in my office, but he would immediately go out of my office and just lay in the hallway. And as everybody would go by, they'd pet him. He knew how to play, the audience, but that was his favorite place to be, was in the hallway every day. Yeah.
On the what about your favorite story? Do you have a favorite? I have a favorite, but I'm interested in what your favorite.
Well, it probably depends on what day you ask me. And I say that because, some are funny, some are sad, some are emotional, some are inspirational, and it's almost like whatever story kind of pops up for what I need. In my Leading from Within program, I use 4 stories every time in there, so I tell them more often. Like the very first one, Conflict on the Mountain, it's one of my favorite stories to tell, but it's not necessarily a favorite story. What I did notice, though, after I wrote the book and then looked at it after I got it, after a month or so had passed, and I felt like it was someone else's book, that there was a theme through the book. A lot of the stories are about overcoming adversity, overcoming fear, overcoming self-doubt, overcoming something. And in each one, there's a relationship or relationships that made a difference, that helped me work through or get through something. So I thought that in itself was pretty significant. So I probably don't have a favorite story.
Well, let's do some teasers here. There's many, many stories in this book, but I'm going to read a few titles, and you just tell us just a bit about what the story's about. You don't have to recite the story.
All right.
But yeah, what's it about? Let's see. Let's start with Bless Me, Father.
I got invited to a Halloween party by a friend. I'd never been at her house before. I'd never met her friends before. It was in Highlands Ranch, so I knew what street it was on, so I didn't even write the address down, because, I figured I'd be able to tell what house was having the party. And wouldn't you know, there's 2 houses, 2 parties. And I went into the wrong house, and I didn't know it for a whole hour because everybody was in costumes. And the story's about the awkwardness and how I finally realized I was at the wrong party. And I was dressed as a priest. So everybody kept coming up to me and like I was a counselor or something. It was weird.
Well, that's an interesting one. Now, what about introducing President Carter?
Yeah, that's to this day will be probably my whole life will be the biggest speech I ever gave. When I lived in California, I mean, I had such a fear of public speaking that I couldn't stand in front of people without shaking and sweating, and it was awful. And so I just for the first time discovered Toastmasters. I'm working at the University of Redlands, and they had a chapter on campus. I was also director of student activities, so I was advising the student groups, and the student government paid a lot of money to have President Carter come speak as our first speaker. And because I did all the work to get him, they were honoring me by having me introduce him, which was the scariest thing anybody could have asked at that point in time. And the story is about, and I happen to be in this Toastmaster club, how that club helped me in 3 weeks turn around this, just imagining on stage, it was about 1,500 people. All the dignitaries in Southern California were, it was like, it just scared me to no end. And so the story is about how I dealt with that, overcame it, and delivered the speech, which I might add is on YouTube. The beginning of it is on YouTube. And it was a long time ago. I have long hair. I had hair, actually. I should say that. I just had hair. It's pretty funny, though.
This one actually got to me. I hadn't read, or I wasn't aware of this one. My Day at the Funeral Home.
Yeah. I had my own company, consulting firm, for 16 years. I like to have close relationships with the companies I work with, so I know what they do. I had the fortunate ability to work with funeral home owners at these conferences where they'd come from all over the country. And I'll tell you, they are the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. In fact, anybody that works at a funeral home, they don't work there for a job. They work there for a calling. It's like this higher purpose. These are amazing people who they can cry, they can get spiritual, they can be crude in their jokes. I mean, like they can hit every emotion all in one setting. And so as I was working with them, I realized I don't know what they do. I mean, I have in my mind what they do, but I don't know what they do. So I asked John Horan, one of the top funeral, not homes in Colorado, but in the country. I said, it's like I asked, but I almost didn't want an answer. I said, do you think I could spend a day at your funeral home, and could you assign me all the different things that people do so I could observe and be a part of for a day so I know what goes on? And he thought it was the greatest idea in the world, and he went to town on me. And it might have only been 8 hours, but it felt like a week by the time those 8 hours were over. And so the story is about what happened and what my experience was like.
Did you come away with a whole different perspective?
Of life and death. And, those people would, how do you deal with all the death? They're like, actually, we deal with the families of the death. We deal with the people that are alive. I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess so.
Let's see, one more from, what about my park bench?
I have a memorial bench at Washington Park. And you're not supposed to have a memorial bench.
Yeah, you're still here, right?
We're
not imagining this.
And it's a whole series of things that happened that led to it. But what I'll say is I'm so grateful I did it because it's a very sacred place for me. And for whatever it's worth, on memorial benches, what you see are, quotes or memorandum or memorial statements to somebody. And this won't surprise you. Mine is the only bench that has 2 questions. Like, I want people to do the work while they're sitting at my bench. And so again, it's my bench, but it's not about me, because people don't think about me when they sit at the bench. They answer the questions, and then it's about them. So yeah.
Do you want to share a question, or?
Well, it's a 2-part question. It's, what are you most passionate about in your life? And the second part is, and how would people know it? The action, because it doesn't matter what you're passionate about. It's like, what's the action?
What is seen?
And in the story, some woman, I won't ruin it, but was in she was deathly ill, and she was in severe depression over that, and she could barely walk, and so she had to sit down, and ironically, it was on my bench. And when she saw the question, she thought,
See, I told you. Their stories are pretty powerful as you go through them. Thank you for talking through some of that. And now, so every summer you do a solo retreat, and you're gone when we're looking for you, but in the Boulder area. But it's also one of your stories. Tell us about that retreat.
Well, a
What's
lot
that
of
like
people
for you?
ask me about it, and I'm like, well, I'll write an article or something. I want to give them something about what I do. But in a nutshell, it's 3 days, 2 nights, or sometimes longer, by myself. And before I go, I think about the things that are most pressing in my life, personally and professionally, and I turn it into an open-ended question. So I usually will show up with 10, 15 questions, half personal, half professional. And then the only objective during that time is just to journal, for me to journal, or on a computer, whatever, is without pressure. Think about the questions, go hike, come back, think about the questions, go out to dinner, come back for 3 days. And what happens is, because for me, there's no pressure, and I'm alone with myself, a whole new realm opens up in my brain, because part of the problem, I think, is that if we try and solve a problem when we only got 15 minutes or a half hour here or there, we tend to solve it on a superficial level. And so for me, but if you get to this place where you're totally relaxed, there's no pressure, that part of I can't explain it, but the brain goes away, and a more deeper level kind of evolves. And I've had major breakthroughs at that retreat that I didn't even know would come, including one that landed me here at the university.
You're right. When there is that 15-minute, 30-minute piece, we go back to our tape. What worked before, let's just do that.
And the only thing you think about is, what are the most recent thoughts you've had to solve it?
Right.
What I'm saying is, there's a whole level below that. And rarely do we even take the time to get to it. And that's where the answers are, in my opinion.
So flipping a question a little bit. So I don't know who knows that you were a cast member in the Renaissance Festival. So is it really like the Game of Thrones and all, or what's that experience like?
I still can't believe I did it, because it's so not me. I'm so not. I can't do improv. I'm not a thespian. I can't act. And the story is kind of accidentally how I backed into it, and how it became the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. It's scarier than anything else I ever went through. And what's ironic about the story is, to be a cast member, and I think I got $200 for the whole summer. It's just a weekend gig, right? They do 8 weeks, 8 weekends of training. And that year, they did it here at Mary Reed on the first floor. They rented out the whole first floor. And once I realized what I'd gotten myself into, because the whole time I'm like, I don't do improv. I don't do that. I'm not coming up with a character. I was that guy. And a lot of them are like, and why are you here? So then they were making us do this stuff, and I was so scared that I tried to sneak out. I actually, because there were 100-some people, you know, they're all dressed in costume using English dialect, and I didn't know what English, I didn't know, costumes? Like, I didn't get the memo for any of this. So I'm trying to sneak out the back door. And the producer of the whole thing apparently knew my name and yelled out, "Greg Giesen, where are you going?" And everybody just turned as I'm at the door like this. And so I just turned around and go, "Nowhere." And I walked back, and it was so humiliating, and yet it became such a significant piece because I'd never been able to overcome something like that. And it was very powerful and it was a great experience.
Did you go back after that one summer?
No, I just did the whole summer, but it was enough to really know I could do it. Yeah, that's all I needed.
Well, in this book, you've added the 8 simple rules to managing conflict, which I know has been a theme for the work you do and that we do, you know, in our division.
Yeah.
Kind of what drove that? What brought that up for you to do?
You know, for one thing, I think it's a great model. We've done a video on each one of them. Mm-hmm. We've done one of these Friday at noons, mm-hmm. which is on LinkedIn Learning now, and it's also on our Fridays at noon. Mm-hmm. Yep. But a lot of my stories are in those 8 lessons. So I thought it was only appropriate to just throw that in at the end because it's still story-based to mm-hmm. teach something. Yeah. So I wanted to leave that somewhere, you know, just because I'm kind of proud of that model. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly something referenced and used a lot, certainly by the people development team and other teams as well. So, well, how's it been going? What's been the reception?
You know, so far, because the book just came out a couple weeks ago, the people that are reading it are the ones that are either in the book, they're on the back of the book, they're in my acknowledgments. You know, I made sure that all those people were taken care of first. But what's been cool about it is I've had so many deep conversations with people because they either want to give their take or a story makes them think about something and they want to talk about that. And while that's happening, I'm smiling because I'm thinking it's working. You know, I'm using my stories to inspire people to tell theirs. And I didn't have to, you know, spell that out. It's like it naturally happens. And so that's been very, very cool for me, is just to see that phase. And so that in itself is worth it to me.
And in a sense, it really becomes about them.
Right.
That you're supporting and serving as well.
Yeah.
So, well, now that this is published, what's next?
You know, I don't know. I think what I might do is turn it into a talk where the talk is using my stories to help people tell their stories. So half of the talk's about me. The other half would then be about them, an opportunity to think about it. Because, you know, what kind of moved me to that place is, you know, my parents, like about a year before they passed, they were still in their prime time, you know, teasing each other, drinking their scotch, you know, like telling stories. And so I got this crazy idea to videotape them and interview them. And it's like really amateur video. And I just kind of did it. And it's a 2-hour video. And now that they've passed, it's probably the most precious thing I have because their personality is in the video. And it doesn't matter if I ask lame questions or what, you know, what matters is they're teasing each other, my dad's rambling and my mother's going, oh, great. You know, it was like, I captured them. And so how can I inspire other people to do that? Whatever medium it is to leave a story. Because I think everybody in this room, if you thought about it, if you've really thought about it, you probably got 5 to 10 pretty good stories. And where are they? And what's happening to them? So I thought somehow maybe I'm going to make that into maybe a keynote or a talk, because that's the message I kind of want to put out there.
Well, and these stories often come from things that we do every day that we take for granted or really don't pay attention to.
Right.
And then when, when someone asks a question, it's like, well, I haven't thought about that. And all of a sudden it comes pouring. You were asking the questions.
Or you read someone else's story and it reminds you of, oh, that reminds me when I did it. Yeah.
Well, how about we end with a story? Okay. Are you game for that?
Yeah. I mean, should I just randomly? I thought about, and it's not necessarily a happy ending story, but it's a good friend of mine. Well, I'd say a good friend. I'm going to use that word loosely because I thought he was a good friend. Like I was in this adventure club, right? And a lot of couples and a few single people. He and I would always end up talking, having a good time. We'd try and do lunch together. He worked downtown. This is back when I worked at Mountain States. And I was very comfortable with him. I mean, I'd consider him a good friend. So he got cancer. And I was even on his support team. I saw him a lot during that time. And he passed away. In fact, he's the one who inspired me to get a park bench because his wife bought him a park bench, and that's when the idea got in my mind. Anyways, so she asked me if I would do a eulogy for him. And I'm like, of course. And I had about 3 days, and I started racking my brain because, we had a lot of conversations, but I couldn't think of a funny story. I couldn't think of a sad story. I couldn't think of an inspirational moment. I couldn't think of an awkward situation. I had nothing, and I knew this guy for 10 years, and I was panicking, and so I punted, and I went with a poem. That's all I had was a poem. And only one other person got up and spoke, so nobody else. And at first I was mad at him. I'm like, you didn't give me anything. I'm talking to him, my mind. Why didn't we? And I wanted to make him wrong. And then I started to realize that I had every opportunity to take this relationship to the next level, and I didn't. I played into the superficial conversation that we had. We talked about, wives or stuff that there's no material there. And after I read the poem and everyone afterward is like, oh, that was a nice poem. I'm like, yeah, right. I mean, felt so disappointed in myself and in him. But what I realized was when he had cancer, I was so uncomfortable because I wanted him to be happy. I didn't want to make him sad, so I avoided the cancer talk. I mean, it was almost a year. Instead, I would talk about everything but cancer. And I notice I've done that with my mother. I think it's probably maybe human nature to do that. I could have gone deep. I could have really connected with him, and I didn't. And so part of that story is it motivates me to write this book because it wasn't fair to him and it wasn't fair to me, and so I'm never going to have a relationship like that again. And so that's why I want my message to be about people's stories so that, and I don't want anybody to read a poem at my eulogy because they don't know me. That would be a failure in my life and my relationship. So it's motivated me to make it different. I will say, though, to give him credit, and his wife particularly wanted to talk to me after she saw this story. And then to fill me in on the rest of the story, apparently there's a lot more, but he had a hard time being real with people, being vulnerable. But he had 2 little kids at the time. And they had these teddy bears where you can record a message. Have you heard of those? I didn't know this until after the funeral. His last words, to each kid, wow, it was very emotional. He became authentic at the end. And afterwards, at the funeral, the little kids were running around with their teddy bears. And it was a great way to end it because I'm like, he did it. He did it. And so I forgot the teddy bear part in the story, though, so it's not in there. But I think that created a lot of inspiration for me.
Wow. You know, we talked about this a year ago. I know it had been percolating before then, but you did it. And what you've always brought here is the idea of authentism and building that with your coworkers, colleagues, friends, and fellow leaders. And you really live it. And I think that's something to be appreciated in all the different things you deliver here.
Well,
so I'm
and
really
I should say
excited
one
about
thing
this.
is Ken let me make writing the book one of my goals. So then I could work on it while I was at work.
Don't tell.
Thank you for that.
But it's very valuable, and it helps all of us. So with that, congratulations. This is really, really good. And so the book, it's all about me, stories and insights from the Geese. And as we wrap, we have a surprise in that on behalf of HRIC, we have complimentary copies of the book if you would like before you head out. But thank you very much for coming to our farewell Fridays at noon. But what a great way to end it, and what a new story that's now starting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.